Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And for those of you not on Eastern Time, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today. And as everyone gets logged in, we are going to wait for just about a minute as people continue logging in via Zoom and get everything connected to their audio. While you are getting logged in, we encourage you to use the chat feature to let us know who you are and who is with us today. So if you want to introduce yourself and what you do, we would love to have you do that right now in the chat. So please engage in that while we continue to wait a few moments while everyone continues to log in. As we continue to give time and space for people to log in to Zoom and get their audio adjusted accordingly, we do want to take a quick minute to mention and thank our sponsors. We do have the Ohio Program for Campus Safety and Mental Health, as well as the Great Lakes PTTC. We are so thankful for their support to make this featured speaker series possible. So we can't do it without them, and we are super grateful to them, and we encourage you to check them out. I am currently placing their links into the chat, and we will do that again at the end as well. Just want to make sure you check those out. They are great resources for training and just information as well. So please check out the Great Lakes PTTC as well as the Ohio Program for Campus Safety and Mental Health. And with that, we would like to go ahead and get started today. My name is Logan Davis with the Higher Education Center for Alcohol and Drug Misuse Prevention and Recovery, as well as the Ohio State University College of Social Work. So thank you so much for being with us today, where we have Dr. Mary Freistad from the Ohio State University, where she's going to be talking about screen time, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so we do have a few housekeeping items before we get started, before we dive into the nitty gritty of the content. So we do want to make sure that everyone gets oriented with the platform. And so you will see here a few housekeeping items on the platform specifically. We will be hosting a Q&A session at the end of this presentation. And so you will see here on the screen that shows you how to locate that Q&A button there. And so we do ask any questions that you have, please use that question and answer panel there. You can put your questions in there, and we will be sure to get those answered at the end of this webinar and presentation. Questions that are put into the chat, we cannot guarantee they will make it to the question and answer session, because sometimes they get buried in the conversation there. So we do ask that you put those into the question and answer panel. Additionally, we want to let you know that this session is available for up to 1.25 continuing education credits. Those are for social workers, counselors, prevention specialists, as well as chemical dependency counselors. You must participate the full 60 minutes to get the 1 hour credit, and through the end of the Q&A and participate in the knowledge check question that will happen at the end to get the full 1.25. And again, that knowledge check question is required to make sure you get that certificate of completion, and the certificates will be emailed to you by the end of July. And an additional housekeeping item is these slides, as well as the recording to this presentation, will be made available to you on the Featured Speaker Series website as well, where the weekly series has all the recordings and presentations have been held. So that will be on the website there, where many of you have registered for this session. So these slides will be made available to you. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce, before introducing, I always forget this last one, and how can we forget what this week was supposed to be our time together with everyone and celebrating community and network, the great work that we are doing in the state. And we had done a great job. The planning committee had done a fabulous job securing phenomenal speakers such as the U.S. Surgeon General. Unfortunately, a pandemic occurred, and he's been a little busy, we know, the last few months with several things, and so unable to join us, but he was so grateful to put some brief remarks for us together, and so we have those available to you. You can go to go.osu.edu/OPCSG, and so you can see his remarks. They're about 8 minutes. I highly encourage you to do that as well. And so I do believe now I have finished my housekeeping slides, and I apologize for that. So now I'm going to introduce Molly Stone with Ohio Moss, and she's going to introduce our speaker today.
Thank you very much, Logan. I appreciate it. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for another featured speaker session. We're very excited to have Dr. Freistad with us. She's a professor and vice chair for Research and Academic Affairs in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Health at The Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center. She also holds appointments there in psychology and nutrition. It's very exciting. This is kind of her last duty at OSU because she will be going to become the Director of Research and Academic Affairs for Nationwide Children's Hospital, Division of Psychiatry and Behavioral Health, soon after this presentation. So she's got some work to do in her office. I'm going to go ahead and let her start talking about her presentation. And with that, thank you very much, Dr. Freystadt, for being with us. And we look forward to your speaking. Thank you.
You. Just need to be able. There we go. Okay. So social media, so many kinds. Here you see a smattering of what the logos look like from many different kind of social media options. In terms of conflicts of interest, none are actually terribly relevant to this talk, but I do receive royalties from Guilford Press, American Psychiatric Press, Child and Family Psychological Services, and I have research support from Janssen. So today we will talk about the rates of anxiety and depression in adolescents and the trends of social media use in adolescents. We'll talk about the high-risk group for use of social media in adolescents, and end with some protective steps that adolescents and their families and those of us who work with teenagers and children can take to reduce the negative impact of social media. But I will say that this talk is all based on research that came, of course, before COVID. So all of the data are pre-COVID. And we know that social connectedness while physically distancing is highly reliant on social media. So really, we're gonna have to take this entire talk with a grain of salt, and everything I'm about to say needs to be understood in that context. And hopefully we will keep having some commentary and some discussion at the end about that. So let's start with what we know about anxiety and depression. It's not a pretty picture. About 1 in 3 adolescents at some point experience an anxiety disorder, girls more than boys, and a little over 8% have severe impairment. So basically 1 in 12. We know that the rates of depression in adolescents are rising. So from 2005 to 2014, went up from 8.7% to 11.3%. And while there was a slight rise in young adults in their 20s, it was not nearly as profound as what we saw in adolescents. And this is a significant increase even after adjusting for substance use disorders and sociodemographic characteristics. Overall mental health care context did not change, but there was an increase for adolescents of specialty mental health providers, prescription medications, and inpatient hospitalizations. Loneliness, a really interesting topic. The magnitude, and we're just really starting to learn about this, the magnitude of this effect is comparable to smoking and exceeds many well-known risk factors for mortality, including obesity or physical inactivity. We know that social support affects a wide range of health conditions, including blood pressure and cardiovascular health, and the social environment can change basic physiology, which of course leads to a change in physical health. But little is known about the stress buffering effect of social support in teens. We do know that loneliness is more prominent in younger people. Okay, so that's just all kinds of bad news. Now let's talk about what adolescents typically do. And I would imagine that many of you, well, we've all gone through adolescence ourselves, and many of you are current or former parents of teenagers. So this will ring true. And we all work with kids of varying ages. So we have seen this in lots of shapes and forms. So what is normative adolescent development? It's a time to establish and maintain more complex and intimate peer relations. Friends become oh so important. There's navigating emerging sexuality and romantic relationships. Developing a cohesive self-identity. Who am I? Who do I want to be? How do I want to portray myself to the world around me? And a real striving for autonomy from parents and other adults. It's like, mom and dad, go away. I'm going to do my own thing. There's an increased focus on peer status and approval, There's a lot more social comparison, what we call reflected appraisal. So what other people think of me really matters to how I think about myself. And lots of feedback seeking. Okay? So this is typical development. And then we know that the social affective brain circuits develop before the cognitive emotion regulation circuitry, which is just a very fancy way of saying the gas comes before the brakes. Okay? So there's a lot of motivation to engage in socially rewarding behavior, but there's a decreased interest in evaluating the potential negative consequences of behavior. In other words, you can do stupid without really thinking about it. And risk-taking increases when with peers. A very good colleague friend of mine likes to say, for every boy you add to a group, to a teenage group, the cumulative IQ drops by 5 points. Okay. So puberty, not age, affects parental buffering of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal reactivity. And while that's potent in earlier childhood, parental buffering loses its effectiveness by puberty. So what does that mean? There was this really interesting study where parents were able to, young adolescents, girls, were given a kind of false, in an experiment, some false feedback about themselves. And when they were younger, the parent could say something comforting, and that kind of settled down the cortisol in these young girls. But as girls got closer to that adolescent switch, having their parents say something reassuring didn't do any good for them at all. They were feeling incredibly stressed by this perceived negative feedback. Okay, so that's what we know about adolescent development. Let's think about how that fits with the characteristics of social media. Social media transforms teen and peer relations. And how does it do this? It changes the frequency or immediacy of experiences. It amplifies experiences and demands. It alters the qualitative nature of interactions. And it facilitates new opportunities for compensatory behaviors. And it also creates entirely novel behaviors. So peer experiences aren't inherently better or worse on social media, but they are different. There's asynchronicity. So somebody sends me a message, I don't have to respond right away. So it gives me time to think about a response. But if I am prone to rumination, it's going to give me time to wonder about that response, perhaps in an uncomfortable way. It's permanent. So poor judgment, and adolescents are known for poor judgment. They can say something on their phone or tablet or computer, and it doesn't go away. It also gives more time to ruminate and compare. It's very public, so you can receive support, but you also have this kind of constant need to prove your competence, and your social flaws are seen by all, or so it appears. There's availability. There's this immediate, frequent access, which is good. But on the other hand, it means that the expectations go up for availability. You should always be available at 2 in the morning if your friend texts you. What kind of a friend are you if you don't respond back? It increases multitasking, even though we are increasingly learning from our neuroscience colleagues that we don't really multitask. We do one thing well and one thing poorly, or all things perhaps poorly at the same time. A plus minus is you can have online only friends. These might be adults who are posing, but they could also be groups with really common interests. And now I would say in the time of COVID, it's incredibly important to be able to connect to friends on social media. And you can stay in touch with friends that move away, or in the time of COVID, you can stay in touch with any friend anywhere, because if they're not in your bubble, you don't get to see them face to face. The physical cues are absent, so social support may be less rich. There's less chance to practice kind of comprehensive social skills. It may be less threatening for socially anxious kids, but it's very easy to misinterpret comments, and kids become, all of us, become more likely to be disinhibited, which can lead to poor behavior choices. Social media is very quantifiable. You can score your friendships in a very concrete kind of way. This may increase disclosure of more dramatic information, and we have some clear data showing that in order to get likes, which are just, little dopamine serotonin bursts that we get in our brains, doing something a little more extreme is more likely to get a reaction. So if you want a reaction, you tend to pose a little bit more extreme posts, which can reinforce problematic behavior. It's very visual. That's plus minus. There's opportunity for more visual communication, but there's becomes then this hyper focus on how friendship appears to others. I was treating a young high school student in therapy where she was kind of going through those kind of angsty, how to get along, who to sit with at lunch, not feeling secure about her social circle. And as she would talk to me about social events she was planning for a weekend, she clearly was more interested in being able to take a picture and post it on Instagram than actually being in the moment with her friend. And we'll come back to that kind of a point. You expect your friends to comment on your appearance, so that visual appearance becomes super important. Not at a time when teenagers in general oftentimes feel really confident about how they look. So now let's talk about the current use of social media by adolescents. Well, let's start with there is no outsmarting kids. You may have heard of this secret calculator folder. It works and looks just like any other calculator until you enter your secret passcode. And then you can store photos, videos, notes, files, contacts, passwords, bookmarked privately in one place, which could be handy, but it also allows you to put on things that, your parents don't want you having, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of social media abbreviations. I believe that Logan and Anthony will make sure you get a handout with the translations of all of those. Okay, so one really useful website to know about is Common Sense Media. And they did a survey in 2019 looking at media use by tweens and teens. And here you see the amount of average daily screen use, not including school or homework, almost 5 hours for tweens and 7.5 hours for teens. Okay. And less time in higher income homes, more in lower income homes. Oop, there we go. Smartphone ownership has risen dramatically, even among the youngest tweens. So here on the lower line going up, that was in the year 2015. And then the higher line going up, let's see if I can, this line is 2019. So you see down for the 8-year-olds, used to be about 1 in 10 or 1 in 9. And now it's basically 1 in 5 8-year-olds have smartphones. And if you go all the way up to 18, it used to be about 3/4 of teens, and now it's 9 out of 10 teens have a smartphone. So certainly ubiquitous. Okay. So Common Sense also had a media survey that they repeated, did one in 2012 and then again in 2018. And they had over 1,000 adolescents aged 14 to 17. And what did they learn? What are some of the pluses? It strengthens relationships with others. It's a means of self-expression. Kids report feeling less lonely and more connected when they are on social media, and it can have a positive effect on mood. But then there's also some negative characteristics. It detracts from face-to-face communication. Kids report feeling left out or less than their friends. And for vulnerable teens, it can worsen self-esteem. For example, if nobody comments or posts on something that they've posted, or if they see that they've not been invited to an activity that some of their peers are. So what's the frequency of use among all 13 to 17-year-olds? The percent who check almost constantly, 16%, hourly, 27%, daily, 30%. And you see about 1 in 5 don't report using social media. And among all of those 13 to 17-year-olds, what's the percent who says that social media is extremely important? 9%. About a quarter say very important, and another 30% somewhat important. Interestingly, again, that the percent that doesn't use social media is staying about the same. But for those of us adults who are on Facebook, look from 2012, I find this kind of funny, to 2018, says Facebook is their main social media site. 68% went down to 15%. The minute all the grown-ups get on, the kids are gone. They have clearly moved on to other platforms. Okay. Now, if you ask teenagers, they're much more likely to say that social media has had a positive rather than a negative effect on how they feel. So in this particular poll, they are more likely to report feeling less lonely rather than more lonely, less depressed, less anxious, more confident, better about themselves, and more popular. So again, we want to hear the voices of adolescents, and they're saying, no, this is great. And it can be very good. And then we just need to know what isn't good about it and how to help them negotiate that. So what's their favorite way to communicate with friends? In person used to be in 2012 was about 1 in 2, and that went down to 1 in 3, saying I would prefer to be in person. You know, and I'm curious what we'll all say after the coronavirus settles down and we all don't have to live in our little bubbles, if there may be this bounding back and just an incredible desire to have face-to-face communication, or if we'll all have gotten so comfortable with being distant that we continue to prefer it. I personally hope that we have this rebounding back and a strong desire when it is safe to really have lots of close contact with others, my personal opinion. Texting stays about 1 in 3, and here you see social media and video chatting on the rise. Oh, one other point. Social media, how many endorsed social media distracts from face-to-face communication went up from 44% to 54% from 2012 to 2018. And social media takes up time for face-to-face communication, went up again from about 34% to 42%. So what are some of the concerns about social media that teenagers articulate? About 3 out of 4 say that tech companies manipulate users to increase social media time. And I would say if we really looked at the research, it's really, that's exactly what tech companies do. Really that percent should be 100% because that's how these tech companies get us to spend time on their platforms. 57% say that social media distracts from homework, no surprise there. 44% report being frustrated with friends who are on social media while they are face-to-face together with their friends. And 2/3 agree that, quote, social media has a negative impact on many people my age. And I find that kind of funny, like, oh, it's bad for other people my age, but not for me. And 20% strongly agree with that statement. 29% report having been awakened at night by a smartphone. We'll talk more about sleep in a little bit. 1 in 3, and this is really interesting to me, wish that their parents would spend less time on social media. So we really have to think about the example we are setting. Even though kids are really turning to their peers in adolescence, they still watch what the grown-ups do. That figure was only 1 in 5 back in 2012, so that's a significant increase. And 20%, this is terrifying to me, 20% say they check messages while driving. 44% say they never do that. But if any of you have taught a teenager, I like to say that I have absolutely loved parenting my own, now young adult children. But the 10 hours, the first 10 hours of behind the wheel were absolutely terrifying to me. And the thought that my kids, once they got their license, would go on and text and drive at the same time, I'm really glad they didn't have smartphones when they were learning how to drive. Okay, fear of missing out, FOMO. We've probably all heard of that. There's a new saying now that I really like, which is JOMO, the joy of missing out. And that's just learning how to unplug a little bit. So there are lots of great ways to unplug, like getting out into nature is my favorite recommendation for kids and for all people. But fear of missing out, a really common phenomenon. Basically half of teenagers report that, girls more than boys, and white more than African American or Hispanic Latinx. How about taking breaks from digital drama? Among adolescents, 12% say that many times they need to do that, and 22% say a few times they need to do that. So you've got about a third saying there are times when I just need to get away from it all. It's too intense for me. And girls are more prone to needing that than boys. The percent of adolescents who say getting new friends and followers is extremely or somewhat important to them, again, about a third. Importance of getting lots of likes, 45%. And the percent who agree with the statement, I feel bad about myself if nobody comments on or likes my photos, again, a quarter say strongly or somewhat agree to that. And then teenagers were asked, do teens think that parents should worry? And a little over half said if parents knew what actually happens on social media, they'd be a lot more worried about it. Right? So let that one sink in. 46% said parents worry too much about teens' use of social media. Okay, how about turning off those phones? 26% hardly ever or never turn off their phone when they're going to sleep at night. And we're going to talk more about adolescence and sleep. But that's really a kind of a problematic. That to me is the most distressing. 55% say they don't when they're hanging out with friends. And then there's hate speech. Back in 2012, you see that between racist, sexist, anti-religion, homophobic comments, over half of teenagers had experienced at least one of those, often or sometimes, and almost 2/3 by 2018. But then if you go to how many of them have experienced this often, so this is a common kind of stress or trigger for them, somewhere in the 21, 24% have oftentimes experienced that, which I think is just really kind of a new thing for teenagers to be stressed by. Cyberbullying. You see that about 13% have experienced cyberbullying. The good news is about 1 in 4 teenagers have tried to help somebody else who's been cyberbullied. Social emotional well-being. In this survey, they included a scale that looked at items about happiness, depression, loneliness, confidence, self-esteem, parental relations. And about 1 in 5 were characterized as high social emotional functioning, and about 1 in 5 low, with about 3 out of 5 in the middle. Those with low social emotional well-being were more likely to say that social media is extremely or very important to them. And yet they also were more likely to have negative experiences, not surprisingly, on social media. Sometimes I feel left out or excluded, 70% of the low social emotional well-being compared to 29% of the high. And here you see, nearly half have deleted posts because they weren't getting enough likes on them. Nearly half say, I feel bad about myself if nobody comments on or likes my post. And 1/3 have been cyberbullied. So it's one of those sad cases of kind of the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. You already are feeling wobbly about yourself. You really want the social media contact, and yet it kind of slaps you in the face. Okay. How often do they put away or turn off their digital devices all or most of the time when they're going to sleep? 70% of those with high functioning, but only 48% of those who were lower social emotional well-being functioning. And again, a difference also with doing homework, but that sleep one is pretty problematic when half are now turning off their phones. How likely are you to feel more or less lonely? Here you see that they report feeling less lonely, less depressed, and somewhat better about themselves. And that kind of makes the same point. Okay. And then there's this whole creative expression. About 1/4 say that social media is very or extremely important for creative self-expression, and that is over 1/3 of those with low social emotional well-being. Then there's some unique risks, and this slide comes from the Center for Family Safety and Healing at Nationwide Children's Hospital. We know that online sexual solicitation is a real problem. These are unwanted requests to engage in sexual activity or talk or give personal sexual information or any such request from an adult. Digital dating abuse, bullying, harassing, stalking, or intimidating a partner via social media or texting. And this is really kind of that notion of power and control. And then there's sexting, sending and receiving sexually explicit or suggestive nude, semi-nude images or videos, usually via a cell phone. And here you see the number of charges for those ages 12 to 17. And here are some resources for you for sexting, and that will be in I think you can print this out at the end of this talk. And here's some more information. And this is actually fairly serious. Registration can be required for a period of 10 years to life. The court might require community notification, can result in residency restrictions. There's mandatory registration for 16 to 17-year-olds, and it's discretionary for 14 and 15s, and not registration for 13s and under. Okay, so what do we know about the research? And again, as a reminder, this is all pre-COVID, and we have to make lots of adjustments in the era of COVID. But in a systematic review of 30 studies, the punchline is it's complicated. Social media, as we mentioned at the beginning of this talk, it's not good or bad inherently, but it's how it's used that matters. And that's so true of most of our kind of activities. It's the frequency, quality, and type of use, the personality characteristics of those using, and social factors related to them. So what are some good things about it? Again, social support. You can access online treatment. There are a number of really creative online treatments for depression, for anxiety, lots of mindfulness apps. So these are great resources. And if kids and adults use them properly, they really can provide some meaningful benefits. So this is a fantastic resource. And you can promote a positive image, that's good. But the bad, again, it's that social comparison, which is worse than as kids talk about real life, okay? Boys can feel inadequate, particularly in terms of dating competitiveness, and girls have just this tremendous focus on appearance. Some other unique problem behaviors: friending ex-partners, following strangers, using excessively, frequent posting, negative status updates, where it's like, oh, I'm feeling pretty rotten. And then you're kind of waiting for people to come back with, kind of kind comments back. And if you don't get them, or if you get antagonistic comments back, those can be really devastating. And then again, it reduces the potential for face-to-face time. Not in the area of COVID, but prior to COVID, yes. So in a study by Lin et al. 4 years ago, depression is, of course, the leading cause of disability in high-income countries. They randomly surveyed almost 2,000 young adults, age 19 to 32, pretty much all using social media. And they looked at those who spent like 30 minutes or less a day to over 2 hours a day. The average use was about an hour a day. High users, again, those over 2 hours, had greater odds of being depressed. And some possible reasons that they hypothesized were social comparison, wasting time and then being aggravated with yourself afterward that you sucked all that time away, or cyberbullying. Jean Twenge had a really, really fascinating study published now 2 years ago, where they examined 3 teen outcomes: depression, and these are huge outcomes, really important: depression, suicide-related, meaning suicidal ideation, making a plan, or actually making an attempt, and then completed suicides. Now these declined or remained stable for decades. Here you see for boys, the rate, and then here girls. And you see this dramatic increase from 2010 to 2015 for girls. And during that time, smartphone use went from about 50% in 2012 up to 92% by 2015. And what did they find? And again, they couldn't say that this was directly because of cell phones, smartphones, but they looked at the correlation in this time period. There was a 33% increase in high levels of depressive symptoms. It went from 16 to 22%. A 12% increase in suicide-related outcomes, from 32 to 36%, and actually a 31% increase in completed suicides, from 5.4 to 7.0 per 100,000. Increased screen time was linked with increased negative outcomes. Increased non-screen activities, such as reading, doing homework, was linked with fewer negative outcomes. And the worst off group were those who had more screen time and less face-to-face time. They had the highest rates of depression. Increased suicide-related outcomes: if you had more than 3 or more hours a day of screen time, you were 34% more likely to have a suicide-related outcome. And if you were on screens 5 or more hours a day, you were 48% more likely to have a suicide-related outcome. Again, ideation, plan, attempt. And here you see a graph of that. The suicide risk increases with increased e-device use. So here's none. So, and interestingly, none is a little bit higher than less than 1 hour. So being completely off social media kind of makes you an outlier. Not saying that that's the recommended amount, but here you see really low rates if you're not on it all that much. But then after you go more than an hour, you see this kind of constant upticking, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, and poof, 5 or more hours. Increased electronic device use, social media use, and reading internet news increased at a disproportionate rate from 2011-2012 to 2015, and increased depressive symptoms or suicide-related outcomes. Decreased face-to-face interactions, reading, sports and exercise, religious service attendance, decreased disproportionately in that same time period. They had this interesting way of saying what's a typical amount of change over a epoch, and they really reported that these were unusually more. Increase in depressive symptoms. Economic factors were unrelated to mental health outcomes. Teens with higher levels of face-to-face time were not impacted by social media. Academic pressure is not to blame. Homework time decreased slightly from 2012 to 2015, and there was more time spent on homework is associated with better outcomes. Watching TV was associated with depressive symptoms, but the amount of time spent watching TV declined from 2012 to 2015. Okay. 3 different interesting stories looking at the impact of screen time on social skills. The first was a summer camp controlled trial. So they had kids who were at a sleepaway camp where they had 5 days with no screens at all, compared to a group of day campers who didn't have any kind of restrictions on screen time. And after 5 days without screens, there was a significant improvement in the ability of kids to read nonverbal cues. In a second longitudinal study of typical adolescents, teens who had more online communication with their romantic partner 1 year later had less developed social skills compared to other peers in the study. And then interestingly, in an experimental design, there was a confederate then with the participant, and simply holding, if the confederate was simply holding a phone or placed it on a table in this experimental room during a conversation, the person who was being studied reported diminished feelings of connectedness and empathy between their conversation, themselves and their conversation partner. So simply having the phone in the room altered their sense of communication. In a study from 2018, 143 Penn undergraduates completed a mood and well-being survey where they tracked active minutes of use on Facebook, Snapchat, and Instagram. And then they broke them into 2 groups for a 3-week trial. In the experimental group, they were asked to spend 10 minutes or less on each of those platforms, so kind of a half an hour total or less. And then the controls had no alterations to their typical use or no recommendations for change. They had 7 measures of outcome: anxiety, depression, loneliness, and fear of missing out. There was decreased depression and loneliness in the experimental group that reduced their time online. And this was particularly pronounced in those with higher baseline depression scores. How about internet addiction? So if we look at our criteria for pathologic gambling, and then just substitute in what would be a comparable kind of a behavior for internet addiction, preoccupation with the internet, tolerance or need for increased time spent online to achieve satisfaction, repeated efforts to stop or decrease internet use, withdrawal, irritability, depression, or other mood fluctuation when internet use is limited, staying online longer than anticipated, putting a job or relationship in jeopardy because of internet use, lying to others about time spent online, or using the internet to regulate, sorry about that, that kind of went. Screen just kind of went on its own there. Use the internet to regulate their mood. This is to the point that the European Union has actually put together a research network to identify and understand problems associated with internet use. such as gambling, pornography, bullying, and excessive use. And they've awarded over $500,000 to study this. And then selfies, a whole nother topic, how filters are changing self-image. Multiple apps allow people to alter their appearances to look more ideal with today's beauty standards. Snapchat, Facetune, Photoshop. This is changing the perception of beauty worldwide and can lead to feeling inadequate and trigger body dysmorphic disorder. What is body dysmorphic disorder? An excessive preoccupation with a perceived flaw in appearance, classified on the obsessive compulsive spectrum. And people may go to great lengths to hide imperfections, engage in behavior like skin picking or grooming, or seek actually dermatologists or plastic surgeons to alter their appearance. In JAMA facial plastic surgery, the percent of plastic surgeons who report that patients requested surgery to improve how they appear in selfies, 42% of plastic surgeons had that request in 2015. Over half had that by 2017. Then there's this appearance-related social media consciousness has been studied. And this is the tendency for a woman's thoughts and behaviors to reflect an ongoing awareness of whether she might look attractive to an online audience. Again, nearly 2 billion photos are shared on social media daily. So they did a study of basically college freshmen, 339, and 3 out of 4 endorsed frequently having this experience where they're, as they're going through their day and just they're walking to class, they might be thinking about, wow, if somebody snapped a picture of me right now, how would I look? Would I look the way I want to be presenting myself to others? And this appearance-related social media consciousness is associated with increased body surveillance, body comparison, and decreased self-esteem. Increased depressive symptoms, controlling for body surveillance, and time spent on social media. We're going to skip that for the sake of time. So I have the luxury of working with undergraduates, and I had, as I was preparing this talk, I had 4 20 to 21-year-olds in my lab, and they were the perfect age because they all got their smartphones around age 13 or 14. And so I met with them in a focus group and got, really picked their brains about their own experiences. And these are for young adults doing really well, doing research in my lab, ready to move on when they graduate from OSU to some kind of useful graduate school or career, and really had their lives pretty well put together. So from this really robust group, this is the kinds of comments that they made. It's another realm of things to worry about. You can share too much. You make unfair comparisons to others because most people only post positive things. Like whoever posts themselves late at night, bleary-eyed, looking terrible, still studying for an exam, behind on rent. I mean, nobody does that. You post your vacations, you post your nice meals out, you post happy stuff, okay? So friends are constantly on phones instead of having face-to-face interactions. It's the new normal. And then this phrase really got to me. Young teens focus on building their brand, which to me was just kind of an appalling concept. They talked about worrying about being judged, and particularly for females. And they commented that girls are raised to be a visual product. Boys are raised to have economic value. And there's a pressure to always be on. So what did they, my little computer is going on its own a little bit here. So what are some prevention strategies? So going back to my focus group, they said it's really important to have face-to-face interactions and to use social media to supplement, not only as a way to not as the only way to socialize. So again, once we get past COVID, it'll be so great, and starting to make safe ways of connecting people, doing the whole physically distant thing, but getting to be able to be in person with others is something I think we're all really looking forward to. Parents should give guidance about dangers, but not just restrict. And kids will mimic their parents' use or overuse. And then they had a really fun suggestion, make it fun to not use your phone. And they gave the example of everybody silences and stacks their phone at a meal. And the first one, when the phone starts vibrating, the first one who just can't stand it anymore wants to know, is it their phone that's doing it? The first one to pick up has to pay for the meal. And they had a phrase, phones off, friends on, which I absolutely loved. They talked about having a buddy system to restrict as needed. And they gave an example of one of them had a roommate who said, lock up my phone while I'm writing this term paper or I'll never get it done. And she dutifully did that. And about a half an hour later, her friend just couldn't stand it and was like, no, give me my phone back. She's like, no, I made a promise. I'm not giving it back to you. Okay. So what can parents and therapists do? Set a good example, monitor, but most of all, have a real discussion with your teenager about the pros and cons. Emphasize non-social media recreation and activities. So remember that 20 study, having face-to-face interactions, engaging in sports or exercise, reading, religious activities, all of those were buffering. So if you had plenty of face-to-face activities, you could be on social media and it didn't have any kind of a negative impact. So you don't want to have social media be your exclusive form post-COVID of interacting. And then focus on healthy habits, sleep, eating, exercise, meditation, or prayer. There are parental monitoring devices, and these are important to know about. I wouldn't put all of the emphasis on this, but it's good to know what's out there. There are built-in apps available on most devices. There's something, and I'm not endorsing any particular one of these commercial products, but just kind of letting you know, and there are probably more out there that I haven't fully researched. Circle with Disney, it's a small hardware device that connects to a personal Wi-Fi network. It's managed by an accompanying mobile app. Parents can configure controls to filter web searches, websites, app content. You can set bedtimes for being able to use your phone, block ads, view internet usage, and other insights, and can even pause the home's internet for a period of time. You can extend that to Circle Go to outside the home. It's $10 a month for up to 10 devices. Another program is called Bark. It has a dashboard that proactively monitors text messages, YouTube, email, and 24 different social networks for potential safety concerns. But I think most importantly is having a conversation, talking about the pros and cons. Hey, have you ever had anything come up that's distressing? How do you handle it? If there's ever anything you want to talk to me about, if things are getting uncomfortable, please let me know. But again, having the conversation, I think, is the most important prevention device. Okay. Here's an example of what Circle looks like. In terms of websites, I think I would encourage you all to go to Common Sense Media. It's a great website. It's a nonprofit organization dedicated to improving lives of kids and families by providing contemporary, trustworthy information and education. And it has information for educators. That's not cool.com. This is an ad-free site that helps teens recognize when digital dating behavior becomes dangerous or abusive, like stalking, violating privacy, pressure to send nude pictures, and how to deal with it. And it includes an adult allies section. So here's a little bit of what Common Sense Media looks like. I took a couple of screenshots. There's the cool, not cool quiz. There's the adult allies page. Okay, so what do we know about parental control over social media use in preteens? Over half of preteens use social media, even though you have to say that you're 13 or older in order to open an account. In a study of 284 10 to 12-year-olds and their parents in an online survey in Australia, the researchers clearly demonstrated that increased parental monitoring led to decreased time on social media, decreased appearance comparisons, and better mental health in the child. Here's a little bit about psychotherapy. Healthy habits are just important in general, and sleep, eating, exercise is just super important. So what do we know about sleep in adolescents? Decreased sleep in teenagers leads to lots of bad outcomes. This is absolutely a tried and true finding. Decreased academic success, impaired physical health, psychological health, including depression and suicide risk, even when controlling for substance use, mood, and anxiety disorders. and decrease safety, particularly driving. And if you really want to get particularly girls, if you don't sleep enough, you're more likely to get fat. 4 out of 5 high school students get less than 8 hours of sleep per night, and both the subjective and objective experience of sleep matters. We know that sleep, exercise, and health status or inflammatory markers are all related to one another. Lots of causes of decreased sleep, but electronic media is a big one. And there are really kind of several reasons for that. One is if you're on your social media, you obviously aren't sleeping. But the blue light, you've maybe all heard of that blue light by now, but the blue light that emanates from any screen, be it a TV, smartphone, laptop, iPad, anything, the blue light inhibits melatonin production, which physiologically impairs sleep onset. And then there's the content of what you are doing late at night. So if you're talking with a friend, and then that gets you kind of emotionally concerned or kind of stronger emotions, then it's harder to settle down and get back into that sleepy kind of phase. Okay. Lots of other reasons for decreased sleep: school start times, caffeine, parental influence, employment, extracurricular activities, insomnia or circadian rhythm disorders, sleep disordered breathing. But the electronic media is probably one of the biggest culprits. Okay. Lots of sleep hygiene strategies. But the one we'll focus on here is turning off electronic devices at least 30 minutes before bedtime, which allows for that, again, that blue light physiologic kind of response to really alter. How about diet and mental health? So I was asking the administrative group for this conference if they had any silver linings out of the coronavirus era. And I would say that one of my silver linings is, with the extra time I've had at home, I've turned to creative cooking. Food really does matter for mental health. In a systematic review of 20 longitudinal and 21 cross-sectional studies, Mediterranean diet, provides a relative risk of 0.67, meaning that you are at that much lower risk for negative mental health outcomes. And regardless of the index, the findings are all about the same, from 0.65 to 0.76. And we know that increasing the anti-inflammatory foods and decreasing the pro-inflammatory foods will confer protection against depression. And what are those foods? We've got converging evidence now from lab, population research, and clinical trials suggesting that dietary patterns and factors may influence depression risk. And the 5 dietary recommendations are following a traditional pattern. And they gave 3 examples here, but the bottom line with really all of them is everything you've heard 1,000 times over by now. But it really matters, not only for physical health, but also for mental health. Increase your consumption of fruits, and particularly vegetables, legumes, kind of beans, whole grain cereals, nuts, and seeds. Include a high consumption of food rich in omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids. So typically we think of that in fish. Replace unhealthy foods with wholesome, nutritious foods, and then really limit the intake of processed foods, kind of fast foods, commercial bakery goods, and sweets. Exercise, another super important thing. We know that insufficient exercise is a global problem. The World Health Organization has launched a global action plan to increase physical activity in order to decrease non-communicable diseases worldwide. Lack of physical activity at age 14 is associated with increased likely of having a mood disorder at age 21. And exercise can lead to moderate reductions in depressive symptoms among adolescents with clinical levels of depression. How about mindfulness, meditation, or prayer? We know that meditation can lead to decreased mental health symptoms and increased coping and self-regulatory processes in youth. In a meta-analysis of 11 studies with almost 1,500 participants, mindfulness-based interventions led to decreased symptoms of anxiety and depression. And it also leads to decreased insomnia in adults. In a couple of studies looking at mindful movement, where you get both the mindfulness and the physical activity. In a study of 160 13 to 16-year-olds, daily 1-hour Tai Chi for 1 school year led to increased self-esteem compared to a gymnastics control group. And in another study, 75 young adults, twice weekly for 10 weeks, they either took a Tai Chi class or they learned Tai Chi via watching a DVD or had a control group. Tai Chi in either of those conditions, learning it in a class or via DVD, led to improved sleep and decreased anxiety. So most of all, as soon as we can get past this corona time and really have more time face to face with others, and we still have our own little bubbles within our families that we can be together, the more you can increase face to face time, the better. At home, really encourage family dinners where you can, as a group, cook healthful foods. Maximize commuting time. I like the no earbud rule, so that when a teenager is needing a ride somewhere, the rule can be no earbuds, this is our time to talk. At school and work, really emphasizing co-curricular activities or volunteer activities. And with peers, plan face-to-face activities as soon as they're allowed. And I love, again, that slogan, phones off, friends on. Some therapeutic recommendations, use good cognitive behavioral therapy principles. Increase your own self-awareness by monitoring. Use Socratic questioning to increase insight. So rather than telling a teenager, rather than telling anybody what to do, ask some questions to help pull the answers out of the adolescent. Emphasize behavioral activation to increase face-to-face time, exercise, helpful meal planning. We have cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia if that's needed. And use, again, all kinds of great apps out there for mindful meditation, for some CBT kind of online. Easy to Google these and find the apps. Again, I'll recommend Common Sense Media. It provides reviews of movies, TV shows, YouTube channels, books, apps, games, websites for various ages. You can search by age or topic. You can access the survey data that I presented today. And there's a whole coronavirus support section. They really keep this information timely. So in summary, social media is not good or bad inherently, but it really depends upon how it's used. We do know that rates of anxiety and depression have risen dramatically, especially for girls. This rise coincides with increased smartphone use. And we have strategies to improve health. Most of all, maintaining or being able to resume as soon as possible face-to-face contact. Use social media to enhance social contacts, not to be the primary contact. Parents, monitor and discuss with your children. Again, not just rigid rules, but really enter into conversation with your child or teenager about their experiences. Do they have any concerns? What's good? What's bad? What's ugly? And then again, that sleep, eating, exercise, mindfulness, meditation, or prayer. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to the leaders for the knowledge check.
Thank you so much, Dr. Freistad. We are so grateful for you sharing your expertise. And I will say the questions are rolling in, so please be prepared to answer those questions. And at this time, so this is kind of a get you prepped for the knowledge check question. We will begin answering it shortly. We will launch that poll in just a few minutes. So at this time, we are going to move into our Q&A. And so please, if you have not already, please submit your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. And so as we're letting those questions roll in and we prepare for the poll question, just a few housekeeping items. Just want to let everyone know a reminder of our sponsors. I'm going to put those links in there now while the chat is not rolling as much. So we do have the Great Lakes PTTC as well as the Ohio Programs for Campus Safety and Mental Health. So we are thankful to them to making this featured speaker series possible. So super grateful for them. And the last housekeeping items that we have, and so we do have one more day within our featured speaker series, and so you can learn more about that by going to go.osu.edu/OPC speakers. And so tomorrow we will have Sheila Savannah from the Prevention Institute and Tony Coder from the Ohio Suicide Prevention Foundation. And so we will have some great sessions tomorrow, so we encourage you to to sign up and to come back tomorrow for both of those sessions. And so now we're going into the question and answer session. We will put the poll question up in just a few minutes. We are only going, we're going to do the poll now. I apologize. So doing the poll now, you only need to put your answers in the chat if you are unable to use the poll feature. If you do not see the poll pop up automatically, I do want to direct your attention now to the Q&A box, where you will see that next to the Q&A box, you should see a poll button. So I encourage you to click on that poll button if you do not see the poll question pop up. And that should bring it up. No worries if you are unable to see that poll feature. Please stay past the Q&A, and we will have an opportunity for you to answer that question in the chat. So the poll is live. If you have not started answering the question yet, we have about 50% participation so far. So I do encourage you to look at the bottom if the poll has not popped up and click on the poll feature. We are answering that poll. We're going to keep it open for a couple more minutes. And then so please answer that question. And while we answer the poll question, we're going to go ahead and direct our first question to Dr. Freistad. So Anthony's going to ask our first question.
Right, so I'm going to do my best to capture our first question that came in, so bear with me. Although you prepared this before the time of COVID, can you comment, even if it's just an impression from your own clients, or how any of these trends and data points might be trending this coming spring, or be trending this spring or spring 2018? For example, I bet the number of youth complaining about parent screen time has increased since 2018, or that youth have shifted from text-based and image snaps to video communication with their peers since physical distancing.
Absolutely. Oh, there's much more time spent online by everybody now, and I would see it less as problematic, and I would see it more as the best coping that we've got right now. So many different platforms for connecting with others. I've heard some comments from, particularly I see some college students and young adults who have reported that they actually are, that some of the pluses are that they are reconnecting with friends from kind of some years past. So I've clearly had some positive comments. I think we're all tired of not being able to have more face-to-face interaction. But now I think, really social media provides our best opportunity for that. So parents have relaxed the rules by and large. I think kids are spending more time, and I think that that's just the current reality, and I think it's going to stay the reality for a while. It's kind of impossible to have meaningful cultivated data that I can report on since middle of March, because studies just don't get published that quickly, so I can't share with you kind of research-based new findings. But I will say that certainly what I'm hearing is just lots more use, and parents saying it's just, it's what we have to do. And I completely agree. And I've really been encouraging of families to kind of loosen. You can loosen the quantity, but you don't have to loosen. It doesn't mean that the quality, like suddenly if you have rules about the kinds of sites you don't want your kids on, et cetera, you don't have to change those sorts of rules, but certainly the quantity, it's gone up for everybody.
Thank you so much, Dr. Freistad. So much has changed as we have to think critically and creatively. I couldn't agree more. So our next question is, do you have any recommendations for evidence-based curriculum to teach students about sexting or those caught with sexting charges in a juvenile court setting? If there is no curriculum, are there good websites or books to maybe check out?
Right, I would go to Common Sense Media, and then the Cool Not Cool sites that I had recommended. They have a lot of really good information about that very topic, how to avoid it, and then some information about what to do if things have gone on further than you wish they had.
Thank you. Is the data similar on non-social media use, screen time, for example, binge watching Netflix or watching videos on YouTube?
So most of the data that I was reporting was kind of screen time in general. So at this point, I think there's been all kinds of binge watching. Again, there's the pre-COVID and then there's the post-COVID, and people have used a lot of electronic entertainment. And the only thing that I would say is to kind of think about a balance. Think about, how do you get outside? How do you get fresh air? How do you get exercise? How do you do other things so that you're not just watching screens? And while you're watching screens, which is very sedentary, chances are good you're eating food. You're probably eating food that's a little bit less healthy. That kind of goes hand in hand with binge watching. At least certainly easy for those things to go hand in hand. So again, I would just encourage folks to think about what are the healthy habits that you can really, as a family, work at instilling. How can you make getting out and going for a hike perhaps more desirable than binge watching yet another hour or more of a program?
Awesome, thank you. And our next question is, what suggestions can we provide to parents that have a child who spends immense time on social media and electronics and will experience escalation when the parent attempts to take these away? And they provide an example that they had a parent that took away social media from a child as a punishment, and the child threatened suicide due to the punishment.
Right, so that speaks to lots of things. One is that at a time when punishment isn't occurring, that sounds like a family that probably ought to have a conversation about what's healthy, what's balance, what else can the child do that is fun and entertaining, what other chores might there be around the house, what else besides just being on social media could this child be spending time on? And for the parent to convey the importance and the health benefits of all of these other activities, and to help understand kind of what else would this child find fun, and what other hobbies could they develop. So again, it's all about balance. And if the only conversation about it is, if you get in trouble, I'm going to take this away from you, it's in a very escalated negative kind of a cycle. So you want to turn that around to what other positive, fun activities are there that I can engage in with you, or you can engage in, to have some of that healthy balance in your life. So that's kind of a prevention strategy. You want to move that back, not just to the point of crisis, but if indeed somebody is so distraught that they think that they want to die because they don't have social media, then you've got a bigger issue that you need to be dealing with. And I would have a really clear conversation with that young person about kind of what else is going on in their life, what else kind of brings them happiness and satisfaction.
Thank you. Do you have tips or strategies for parents to begin reducing their young children and tweens screen time?
Really encourage and model other activities. So getting kids excited to come up with meal planning and cooking together, coming up with other family activities that they can do. Do you want to all go out to a metro park and take a hike? Is there a backyard pool, or is there a pool somewhere that you can get to? Is there a little family trip that you can drive to half an hour away and go, do something that's kind of pleasant? Can you go out and throw a ball around? Can you play basketball together? Are there other things to do?
To go with that question, Dr. Freistad, thinking about younger children and teens and screen time, what are kind of your thoughts or experience, and what does the research say specifically about YouTube videos?
There's not specific research on YouTube videos, but again, this is where you'd kind of want to monitor some content and have some conversations with your kids about what they're watching. There's lots of great stuff on YouTube, and then there's a bunch of stuff that's probably not so great. So again, this is where I really would emphasize parents having conversations with their kids. And it takes some effort. And I really recognize that parents are feeling stressed and strained themselves, particularly parents who are either now going through financial difficulties because they're not employed, which gives them lots of time, but lots of stress, or parents who are attempting to work from home while they've been homeschooling their kids who've been out of school, or kind of managing them over the summer while they're trying to keep their work going. So I really, really empathize with parents who have a lot of pressure right now. But in the time that you have together, again, having some of those conversations about what's good, what's funny, setting limits, watching some things together, really encouraging some family time with all of that, I think is a useful strategy.
Thank you. I've had, one of the questions came in. I have had students say that they fall asleep listening to music or audiobooks on their phones. Can that lead to sleep or medical issues?
Well, they're falling asleep, so that's good. A lot of people fall asleep to music. The trick is if you can then kind of not have your phone wake you throughout the night. So that's probably the bigger thing, is just then having a way that the phone can really shut off, or not ring, not get any kind of alarms during the night.
Our next question, Dr. Freistad, is about video games. And were there any data that it includes video games, or do you have any? This person says that they feel like video games would have a similar result as time spent on social media. And even now we know the merging of the two with Twitch and similar platforms.
Right, so some of the research really included any kind of screen time, and then some was more social media specific focused. So it's kind of a potpourri. But I would say really with all of that, the difference is, are you interacting with another? And then even within video games, there's some that are very Fortnite. I mean, there are lots of examples of interactive games versus I'm just playing this by myself. So anything that involves more interaction with other people, I would say in general is in the category of I'm interacting with somebody versus I'm just doing this all by myself. So I don't know if that kind of begins to answer the question.
So we've had a couple of questions just mentioning that they haven't been able to answer the poll. I just would like to reiterate that after we get through these Q&As, Logan and myself will stay on afterwards and then pose the question for everybody who wasn't able to answer via the poll to put their answer in the chat. So we'll address that at the very end. We are coming close to time, so we just have a few more questions, and just being mindful that we might not be able to address all of them that we've received. Could you share your thoughts on younger children and toddlers with technology addiction?
It certainly is real. This is a great reason to not use a lot of screen time. Really encourage families to develop other hobbies, to expose their kids to other opportunities for physical activity, for creative activity, music, reading, sports, religious activities, lots of other ways to spend time so that the go-to isn't always a screen. And certainly there are plenty of examples of infants, toddlers coming into well child checks in pediatric offices where the parent, for the 5 seconds that the child needs to be waiting for something, they put a phone right in front of their face to entertain them. Babies and young children are not wired for needing that kind of entertainment, and we don't want to rewire their brains to need that. Babies and toddlers are wired to look at a parent's face and interact with a parent. So I would say just keep those screens away as much as possible from little tiny people.
I agree. Thank you for answering that question, Dr. Freistad. I will say, as the parent of a 2.5-year-old, a very relevant question for me. So thank you. And thank you to whoever asked that question. I greatly appreciate it. The last question that we do have time for is there a difference between social media use and real online gambling and how it affects teens' moods, behavior, and social skill development?
Read that one more time. I'm not sure I quite
Absolutely.
got the gist of the question.
Yeah. Is there a difference or maybe a connection between social media use as well as real-time online gambling and how it affects teens' mood, behavior, and social skill development?
Well, we know that kind of addictive level of gambling is a really unhealthy behavior. That's why that European Union funded study of over $500,000 is looking at pornography, gambling, et cetera, kind of maladaptive uses of social media. And just like some people, you can give them, they can have one hit of cocaine and they're addicted. They can have one drink and they're ready to, drink for life. Other people can be exposed to drugs, to alcohol, to gambling, and there's no kind of addictive propensity. But some people have a very strong addictive propensity, and they are more likely with the opportunity for gambling to really fall into that really maladaptive overuse. So I think that that's something that really is variable from person to person. I think there's kind of a natural predilection, and then there's what else is going on in their life at the time. So again, it's that nature nurture. There's always nature and nurture that goes into these kinds of behaviors.
Absolutely, and I also want to acknowledge there was an error on my part. And so the question initially was gaming, so I apologize. And so thinking about that question, and I'll reread it, is there a difference between social media use and real-time online gaming and how it affects teens' moods, behavior, and social skill development? I know we've talked about this already, but I didn't know if you wanted to clarify even more.
Well, it's kind of like how much, again, I'll kind of go back to that same point, how much time is spent online on anything versus doing other stuff. So I would kind of, if you remember nothing else from this talk, what I would say is make sure you do other stuff. That's kind of, do it in real time, do it with real people, and do things other than screens. Don't let screens be your whole life. Recognizing that in the era of the coronavirus, we are all much more connected to our screens than we have been, and that will continue for some time to come. But as soon as we can get back to much more face-to-face and physically active, getting out there and doing things, the better off everybody's mental health will be.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Freistad, for your content as well as answering questions. So that is all the time that we have for questions today. Again, I want to thank everyone for attending. So we are going to end the live poll. However, we acknowledge that not everyone has had a chance to complete that. And so experiencing some technical difficulties. So please, so that concludes our live webinar today. Currently, we are going to stay on so you can answer the knowledge check question. I'm going to read it aloud in case you're not able to do that. If you are on the phone and unable to obviously can't complete it via your computer, Anthony and I will be able to stay here so you can answer it verbally as well. So that question is: normative development tasks of adolescents include all but which of the following? A, establish and maintain more complex, intimate peer relationships. B, create a new self-identity. C, increase focus on peer status and approval. And D, increase social comparison, reflected appraisal, and feedback seeking. So again, if you were unable to use the poll feature, please answer it in the chat. We're just answering A, B, C, or D. And please stay on if you are on the phone and unable to answer the question via your computer, and you can answer that to us verbally as well. Just let us know. Anthony and I are going to be on mute, but we will respond as we hear from you if needed. So thank you all so much. We hope you have a great day and hope you can join us again for our sessions tomorrow.